and appropriately socially distanced. I will call the meeting to order, and to begin, call your attention to the Open Meetings Act posted here in the council chambers. If you now please join me in rising for a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please begin.
Granquist.
Here.
Lange.
Here.
Merrill.
Here.
Weeblehouse.
Here.
Murin.
Here.
Jackson.
Here.
Clausen.
Here.
File.
Here.
Okay, with that, I would look for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved. Second.
Motion and second. If no discussion, roll call, please. Since not all of the council members have their voting devices, we will do roll call for each of these votes.
Granquist.
Yay.
Lange.
Yay.
Merrill.
Yay.
Weeblehouse.
Yay.
Murin. Jackson.
Yay.
Clausen.
Yay.
File.
Yay.
All council members voting in the affirmative. Motion carries.
Okay, would then entertain a motion to approve the full agenda.
So moved, Your Honor. Second.
Motion and second. If no discussion, roll call.
Granquist.
Yay.
Lange.
Yay.
Merrill.
Yay.
Weeblehouse.
Yay.
Murin. Jackson. Clausen.
Yay.
File.
Yay.
All council members voting in the affirmative. Motion carries.
Okay. Moves us to item number 16 on the council agenda under public hearings and related action. We'll open this public hearing to consider creation of a clean energy assessment district known as the City of Norfolk PACE District, which boundaries shall be the corporate boundaries of the City of Norfolk and its extraterritorial jurisdiction. And to kick off this discussion, Randy Gates, our City Finance Officer, please.
In 2016, turn this on first. In 2016, the legislature adopted the Property Assessed Clean Energy Act, or PACE Act. PACE provides commercial real estate financing for energy efficiency, water conservation, and renewable energy systems. PACE loans are long-term, fixed-rate, non-recourse loans secured by assessments on the property with a priority equal to property tax. PACE loans are normally made by private lending companies. City involvement through the PACE district is required in order to levy PACE assessments. PACE assessments are only filed as a lien against the property if they become delinquent. All installment payments are made directly to the PACE lender and not the city. PACE financing is a tool that can be utilized to promote economic development in the PACE district. Because PACE loans can't be accelerated, they often replace equity in the capital stack, making project financing easier. Chris Peterson, President and CEO of CP Strategies LLC, has requested the city create the PACE district. CP Strategies works with developers to secure PACE financing from a PACE lender. Chris is here tonight to make a presentation on PACE financing and answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Remind everyone this is a public hearing. I think first off we'll hear from Mr. Peterson, but anyone who wishes to make comment afterwards can do so. Welcome, Chris.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council and city staff, first, thank you for your service. My name is Chris Peterson, and I am a PACE consultant and helped to pass the PACE law in 2016 in Nebraska as a lobbyist. And since that time, I've worked with communities like yours around the state to adopt PACE programs. And so tonight I'll give you an overview of what PACE financing is and why someone would want a PACE loan for their property. So PACE is an acronym, stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy, and these are primarily commercial real estate projects that we'll talk about. There's just 3 states in the country where There's residential PACE, but residential PACE is not really taken or occurred in Nebraska as of this time. And so it's really commercial PACE that we'll focus on. And so this is for energy efficiency. It's for water conservation and renewable energy systems. That's what you use a PACE loan for, is to finance those portions of a commercial real estate project. This is long-term financing. It's can be up to 20 years and longer than 20, 25, even up to 30 years. These loans are they're with private capital and they're fixed rate, and these are non-recourse because they're attached to the property. PACE loans are secured to the property as annual assessments on the property and or special assessments, and they're giving priority status there for equivalent to property tax should there be a foreclosure. There is no public funds involved in PACE financing, in commercial PACE financing, and there's no city or taxpayer liability. Tonight we're asking that the city establish a program that that the city would administer and be able to approve applications for PACE projects, but there's no liability or no public funds involved. Today across the country, you'll see on this slide, the states in green either have active programs or have programs in development. PACE has been around, I think I mentioned earlier, for about 10 years. And so in that time, states across the country have been developing programs. And I've been involved in PACE projects, PACE loans in Nebraska, Missouri, and Colorado. Every state's program is a little bit different. But with Nebraska having adopted our program in 2016, we have a lot of the most updated aspects of the law versus some of the states that came early on. So kind of a timeline of how PACE has come about. In 2016, the legislature adopted the PACE Act. Since that time, several cities have followed, like we're asking Norfolk to do tonight, and adopted local programs. Omaha was first, followed by Lincoln, and then through introduction to developers and property owners, commercial real estate attorneys, accountants, and city economic development officials. We got some traction in 2017 and into 2018 and began to have the first PACE projects in Nebraska. At this point, there's almost or about a dozen cities that have adopted PACE. North Platte is the most recent. I did a presentation there several weeks ago for their first reading of an ordinance, and they chose to go forward and have 2 more readings before putting the ordinance in place. But it was a meeting similar to this, except I was there via Zoom. I had gone and presented in person to the council last fall. So tonight here in Norfolk, and excited to be here to visit with you about this. The largest project in the state to date has been in Omaha for the Capital District, where the newer Marriott Hotel is. And that total transaction, PACE transaction, was about $25 million, which in 2018 was the largest PACE transaction in the country. It was actually a package of 3 loans on the hotel, the apartment building, and on the retail space there in that area. The smallest project to date has been about $500,000 for upgrades of an existing Hampton Inn in La Vista. And altogether, there's been at least 14 projects to date in Omaha, 2 in Lincoln, and then we've done a couple of hotel projects in Hastings and Columbus in the last few months. More than $60 million in projects so far. There's a project in Grand Island, which is the one of the few projects in Nebraska that I have not been intimately involved with. I had some discussion with the city about the adoption of PACE there, and I don't know for sure if that PACE loan closed there, but it would have been, or supposed to be, or should be, or was a $40 million PACE loan for expansion of the JBS Swift plant there. As I've mentioned, a lot of these have been hotels, but also apartments, an indoor sports facility in Lincoln that is just about completed out on West O Street, and hopefully will be filled up soon with young people playing basketball and volleyball. A car wash in Omaha where we funded water reclamation system that, given Omaha's higher wastewater fees, really helped make great economic sense for a new construction car wash and some retail. So what is PACE finance? In Nebraska, it's anything that touches energy efficiency, and so there's some examples here on this slide. HVAC systems, lighting, those are some of the obvious ones, but again, anything that touches energy efficiency could be looked at as a qualifying energy conservation measure. But also water conservation, low flow toilets, for example, low flow fixtures could qualify, and renewable energy systems. And so if somebody wanted to use solar panels on their building or geothermal system, for example, those could qualify as well to be financed with PACE. Some more examples here, and again, we just want to make sure that everybody knows that it really is A to Z, soup to nuts, in terms of what you can finance with a PACE loan. And you can also finance items that are related to those energy efficiency items. Like, for example, let's say in an existing building, if you were going to replace all the insulation in the walls, you could finance a portion of the costs of removing drywall and putting that insulation in place, and then putting the drywall back up and painting it. And so there is a provision to allow some of those costs as well to be included in the PACE financing. So PACE can be used for new construction, but also for renovations and retrofits, rehabs, conversions, office, hotel, industrial, nonprofits, private education facilities, private healthcare, churches, YMCAs, all would be potential. Even a church that today wouldn't necessarily be paying property taxes could take on a PACE loan and have a special assessment approved for the property for them to be able to use PACE to fund an energy efficient project for the PACE or for that church, for example. So where does PACE fit in the capital stack? PACE is often treated as equity in the capital stack, and so it typically would replace owner's investment or mezzanine financing. It typically does not compete with bank financing. It's a different finance vehicle, and so it's usually fits in the equity section of a capital stack for a project. What are the benefits of PACE? Well, in many states, actually, you can use PACE up through project completion and then even beyond, and use it as refinancing or retroactive financing. In Nebraska, you can only use it through the construction period up until occupancy or a final certificate of occupancy. PACE can fund 100% of those energy conservation measures, which might end up being 15 to 25% of the value of the property at the completion of the construction project, whether that's new construction or renovation of a project. And PACE loans, as you've heard me mention earlier, could be anywhere from $500,000. I've actually have been working on some loans smaller than that on a couple of projects in Omaha, up to $40 million. The project that I mentioned in Grand Island earlier, if that happens, or if it has happened, it would be one of the largest PACE projects in the country since PACE has been around. But you can certainly, if a lender is willing, you could certainly have a loan at that amount. There's no lengthy public approval process for PACE. So once you adopt an ordinance and put a program in place, a PACE application does not come back to the council. It rests with a PACE administrator, typically someone here on the city staff, who would be charged with reviewing that application. And quite oftentimes that individual will solicit advice from other city staff, and it'll be a collaborative effort to review the application and make sure that it's been completed correctly. I've talked a little bit about banks and how PACE loans don't compete with bank financing, or typically don't compete with bank financing. But a bank or a senior lender on a construction project, or someone, a bank or senior lender that has a mortgage on a commercial building, has to consent to a PACE loan. And so a PACE loan can't just jump in the capital stack without a bank or senior lender's approval, and that it has to be a written approval ultimately. And at this point, we've had a lot of Nebraska banks consent. I've visited with a lot of banks about PACE, educating them on it. And once they understand how it works mechanically and how a PACE loan never accelerates, it's behind that senior mortgage or bank loan unless there's a default, and then the lien is just for the amount of the missed payment. Not for the entirety of the loan. Once they understand all that, banks get comfortable and are a willing partner to have one of their borrowers use a PACE loan. So here's kind of how things work, or how things would flow. So tonight, if the council was willing, you would adopt a PACE ordinance and designate a PACE administrator through that adoption. You, in your packet, have a proposed program guide and application fee, and there's a fee schedule in the program guide. And so all of that would come together to establish the PACE program. And then your city staff, the PACE administrator, would accept PACE applications. The PACE administrator reviews those applications. Once they've decided everything is in order and can give approval, they would issue a letter of qualification or approval. And the PACE administrator is typically the person who reviews and approves and ultimately signs an assessment contract between the borrower and the lender and the PACE district or the city, which lays out the terms of the loan agreement. And that assessment contract is filed with the Register of Deeds. So if anybody does a title search on the property, they'll know that a PACE loan is there. The city has a few fees that they pick up in the process. There's a $1,000 application fee. Most jurisdictions in Nebraska have adopted a $1,000 fee, although I've seen fees anywhere from $20 to application up to $1,000. And then there is a administrative fee that's charged at the time of approval of the project and is paid to the city when the loan closes. And that's typically 1% of the project cost. And so if it's $1 million PACE loan, not project cost, but 1% of the loan amount, if it's $1 million PACE loan, the city would receive a fee of $10,000. Most Nebraska cities have capped that fee at $40,000. I think one or two cities might have capped it at $25,000. And then there's an annual fee that the city will receive, $500 for every year that there are PACE payments and the loan is in place, so potentially 20 years or longer, for any ongoing administrative costs you might incur. But again, those will be very minimal. You do have an annual report that the city will have to file with the legislature about your PACE program's activity, and that really is among the most work that has to be done going forward, other than reviewing and approving applications. And then if there is a default, the city does have a responsibility to file a lien If there's a missed payment, you'll receive, there's a process by which the city, the PACE administrator, city staff would receive a notification that there's been a missed payment, and you have a period of time in which to file that lien. And so that is an obligation going forward. So why would you adopt PACE? Well, there are businesses in this community, businesses coming to this community that have an interest in using it. There's a hotel project where the developer wants to use PACE for here in Norfolk. On my drive up here this afternoon, I spoke with a developer who has a couple of projects in a few different communities in Nebraska, and they'd like to use PACE in each of those communities, and want to have a discussion about using PACE here on a project. And even after arriving here this evening, I heard of another potential project in Norfolk where PACE might be of interest. And so there definitely is interest by property owners and commercial developers to have this tool available. Again, there's no public dollars at risk. You've heard me describe some of the obligations that the city would have, and given the fees that the city receives, your costs, any costs incurred would be recouped fairly quickly after you've done one project, or certainly two. And so there is no risk. I often get asked at council meetings like this, tell us the real story. What is the downside? And heretofore, there is no downside. And so it really is a win-win-win sort of tool to put in your economic development toolbox. You'll see the last bullet point, Iowa and Kansas don't have PACE laws today. If you were pitching a manufacturer or some kind of business that was trying to go into a Midwestern community, perhaps PACE would be the item that would tilt things over the top and land a project in Nebraska, as opposed to it going in Iowa or Kansas, where they don't have PACE. And so maybe that would be a difference maker. So why not put it in your economic development toolbox? So this is just a quick overview for you. I know you've got material in your packets about PACE, but I'm certainly happy to answer questions as I've done in communities across the state, and look forward to working with you and with city staff should you proceed and adopt a PACE program and head down that road tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Any questions for Chris? I'll just say, generally, I like this idea because it both incentivizes energy efficiency, which we should be doing anyway, and provides a tool leveraging the energy cost savings to help finance a project. And I think the point that was made that our neighboring states, Iowa and Kansas, do not have this as a tool currently in their toolbox is a comparative advantage that we have. I think that speaks to a number of Nebraska communities recently adopting this. Chris, you mentioned this is primarily focused on commercial development, but is residential PACE usage in Nebraska not permitted, or just not common practice at this time?
Sure. So the map that you saw earlier shows really commercial PACE programs around the country, with active programs in 25 to 30 states. And there are residential programs today in 3 states, Missouri, Texas, I believe, and California. There's been some concerns about consumer protection when it comes to residential PACE programs. And so I think that really has slowed the movement of residential PACE to very many states, wanting to make sure people aren't just knocking on doors, getting people signed up for solar panels or to replace their HVAC units, and then they get they get a bill later and they had no idea what they'd signed up for. So so that has slowed residential pace. In Nebraska, our PACE law does allow for residential PACE. The structure is laid out, but to this point, no city has decided they really want to make a big push on it. And what I had heard when Nebraska adopted the PACE law in 2016 is that if it was going to happen, you need volume. And so you'd really need probably at least Lincoln, if not Omaha, to adopt a program so that the broader infrastructure could be set up and bring PACE lenders in to work with cities to implement it. And so I don't see that happening in the near term, but maybe further down the road as consumer protection issues get resolved elsewhere to people's desired level, then maybe it would happen here.
Chris, maybe you explained it, but I might have missed it. So the benefit to the commercial, besides the borrower, besides the equity that they can use for, is there an interest rate benefit? And then the second half of the question would probably be, with the public entity getting paid the fees, is that for us to collect the payments from them?
Okay, great question. So I'll take the second question first. In many states, PACE loans are paid as part of your property taxes. PACE is a special assessment, and so that's the way it initially was set up as PACE started about 10, 12 years ago. However, a few states started to adopt direct collection, allowing a borrower, or a lender rather, to invoice each year the borrower for the special assessment. And so I brought that concept to the legislature, asked them to consider it, and they adopted that. And they did that in actually 2017 when we cleaned up and tweaked a few things, or the legislature tweaked a few things. And so every PACE loan to date that I've been involved with in Nebraska has used a direct collection method. If you didn't use a direct collection method, then the county would collect the PACE assessment as a special assessment at the same time as property taxes are collected, and then the county would remit that to the PACE administrator, which means that money would then come to the city, and then the city would send that to the PACE lender. And so we've eliminated the need for those administrative steps. It's certainly it's still available, and so somebody at some point could say, no, that's the way I want to do it, and the process is there to do that. The county then would collect a 1% fee, so you'd have an increase in costs, and so you'd have to account for that cost. Your first question, what was your first question?
Besides the equity benefit,
Oh,
what
yes.
does the borrower get?
So reasons a commercial developer or property owner would want to use this. It's really not interest rate as compared to a bank interest rate. Today, maybe you get a commercial real estate loan, let's say for 3.5%. A PACE loan today might be 5.5%, 6%, 6.25%. And so that's why I have said repeatedly this evening, we're not talking about competing against banks really, but we're talking about competing against mezzanine financing, going out and getting a loan for 10 or 12 or 14 or 18% interest from some capital entity, or from Uncle Jerry, who's sitting on $1 million, and yeah, he'll lend you $500,000, but he wants 15% interest. So that's one reason you might do it. The non-recourse status, and so it gets it off of your balance sheet, and so that's another reason that somebody might want to use PACE. Another reason you might use PACE is tax treatment. Because PACE has only been around 10 years, the IRS hasn't said definitively this is how you treat PACE loan payments, and so some CPAs will look at PACE and say it's a special assessment, looks like a tax, could be collected like property tax, The state statute actually says it runs with the land. And so it's a tax. And so a CPA might say, we're going to write off 100% of the payment. And so instead of taking a depreciation on those items that we're financing with PACE, we're just going to write off 100% of the payment every year. Other CPAs might look at it and be more conservative and say, I'm not so sure. And so but that's one reason that you might do it. It could fill a gap in a capital stack. Let's say somebody needs $5 million for a project, and the bank's willing to do 3.5, and you've got $500,000 in cash, and you've got $1 million gap. So you could fill it nicely with a PACE loan, and given that PACE loans often can pay for 15 to 25% of a project, that $1 million, kind of a sweet spot on a project like that. Some people might use it to say, hey, I'm doing things with energy efficiency, and here's a marketing reason to do it, a branding reason. We used a clean energy, a green energy a lending tool. So there could be a lot of different reasons.
All right, thank you.
Chris, primarily to date in Nebraska, has PACE been used for new construction projects or some renovation conversion projects?
Some of the projects included several new construction hotels, the Hampton Inn in Columbus, a Hampton Inn in Hastings, the new downtown Holiday Inn Express in Lincoln that is not quite come out of the ground. They've been pouring the footings. In Omaha, the renovation of the old Blackstone Hotel has a PACE loan on it. The conversion of the old Woodman of the World tower, not the new white one that stands up in the skyline, but the old Woodman building. It's going to be a Hilton Curio, and that renovation, part of it is paid for with a PACE loan. New construction car wash, new construction indoor sports facility. So it's been a bit of a mix, but I do think that as people become more familiar with it, I think one of the places, one of the sectors that could really benefit from it, where we'll start to see some traction, is manufacturing. I think as manufacturers become familiar with what PACE is and how to use it, and as they're thinking about their capital costs and their need to address energy, which next to labor, energy is one of those big costs. I think your manufacturers in Norfolk should look at this, and in Columbus and in Fremont, elsewhere. I think it could really help solve an issue they face every day, which is how to deal with those energy costs and how to replace very expensive old items in their infrastructure.
Okay. Any other questions for Chris?
You talked about the property taxes and how this was paid. This doesn't take from the current property taxes?
No, if anything, it has the potential, or should, increase a property's value certainly on renovation and rehab of existing buildings. But no, in states where it's collected with property tax, it's a special assessment in addition to property taxes.
Okay. Any other questions? All right.
I just have one. If the property is sold off to a different, does the PACE have to be paid back at that time, or does it carry on with the owner?
Yeah, great question. So because this is non-recourse, because it runs with the land, it would naturally then transition from one property owner to the next in a sale. However, it could be a deal point in a sale where perhaps the new owner, the purchaser, would say, I'm not interested in that, and so you're going to have to pay that PACE loan off in order for me to buy your property. So that could come up. PACE is new enough, having only been around 10 years. There's not a whole lot of data points, although there's been thousands of these done in the country now and billions of dollars worth of PACE loans. We still haven't had a lot of turnover yet in properties. And so we looked at this question about 2 years ago and reached out to some lenders, and the feedback we got was kind of a mixed bag, whether or not the PACE loan was having to be paid off or whether it was sticking with the property. So I would imagine that maybe in the next few years there'll be more data points and maybe more definitive which direction it goes. But as with most items in a purchase of a property, it probably becomes a negotiation point.
I got one more. Sorry, I'm way back here behind you, but I guess sell me on it again of why a city would want to be involved in doing administrative costs, trying to collect unpaid loans, if you want to call it that. Why would we want to take this on?
So the cost of reviewing the application and giving approval will be at least, if not more, recouped in the administrative fees from the PACE project. When it comes to filing a lien for a missed payment, literally that would be a paperwork issue. The city's notified that a payment was missed. The city files a lien on the property, and that's the extent of the obligation. And so it is about putting another tool in the toolbox for your businesses in your community, that especially in it's kind of beating the dead horse, this uncertain environment between COVID-19 and civil unrest. Here's another tool in the toolbox to help developers, help business owners invest in their business, free up capital for other projects or needs, which today those needs could include cash flow. And so somebody right now who's planning a project or in the middle of a project, maybe they were going to put $1 million of their own money into a project. They hear about PACE, and instead of putting $1 million in, we come in and do a $500,000 PACE loan, and it frees up $500,000 that maybe because of today's economic uncertainty, they don't have that today. They thought they were going to have it 90 days ago. So it is really just another opportunity for your developers, your property owners, and as you're recruiting folks to come here, to be able to use this tool and to keep businesses here back to, I don't want to, this isn't going to happen every day, but again, let's say there's a manufacturer with a site in Kansas and a site in Nebraska, and with everything that's going on, the changes in the world economy, they're trying to decide which one are they going to keep open. And the PACE loan makes sense for them to make the investment and keep the plant here as opposed to the plant in Kansas. So why not put it in your toolbox and have it there and have it at the ready if somebody wants to use it? And every city, fortunately, every city that I've gone to and we've had a project where somebody wants to use it, every city stood up and has adopted PACE and put it in place. And we've successfully put through applications and gotten approvals and closed loans in Omaha and La Vista, Lincoln, Fremont, Hastings, and we're actively working projects in Columbus and Papillion, La Vista, and Omaha, and Lincoln, North Platte, and Beatrice adopted it, and I've got projects down the road where people want to use it, and so I just encourage you to put it there so somebody could use it if they want to.
And Chris, would you say in most of these cities that the PACE ordinance adoption has come at the request of a developer wanting to do a project in the city, saying, look, this is another incentive that we'd like to have in place?
Absolutely. I've Mr. Mayor, this is my first trip to Norfolk. Been here several times. Been to Oktoberfest. I'd like to come to Norfolk, but I wouldn't be here tonight if there wasn't a project where they wanted to use it. In fact, we would intend to use it and would expect to file an application very shortly after the ordinance is in place for a hotel project here in Norfolk.
Are you aware of any communities having to have filed liens on unpaid PACE loans to this point?
So I would say that prior to COVID-19, the answer I would give you with no hesitation is that in the 10 years that this has been around, there's been almost none. Typically, these are because they're commercial interests, because there's banks involved that have to have consent, and the PACE lenders are typically sophisticated with very sophisticated underwriting. There's just not been that issue. Now, this is something we haven't experienced in our country for almost 100 years in terms of the economic situation. So I'm sure there's going to be some of these that pop up, but there's a process. There's a process to obviously cure defaults, and so there's a process to be able to work through all of that.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions?
Well, I just got a hypothetical situation I'm kind of thinking of it in my head. There's a company that wants to, or has talked in the past, and we've talked in the past about reclaiming water. PACE could be used for something like that, as far as bringing it back around to the other plant.
Yes, PACE can be used. I'm trying to think of the right terminology, and I'm not sure I'm going to get it. PACE can be used for natural resources, for I can't think of the right term, but advancing natural resources. And so, yes, we could find a way through the statute and through the program that you've set up to be able to have PACE be available for a project like that. And that is what it was used for the water reclamation. We were able to, in that project with the car wash, we were able to reduce water usage because of the reclamation for that one facility. But if it was a water reclamation specific project, certainly something I'm sure we would look at. But it's unusual, so I'll dance around a little bit as to whether PACE for sure would work. But it's something we could look at, and I think the statute would allow.
Chris, I don't have a question for you, but I do for our city administrator, if you don't mind. Andy, from an economic development standpoint, do you see this as a positive for your economic development people talking to potential commercial folks in town?
Yes, and recently, I would say within the last few months, we have had some conversations where PACE has come up on both sides of the table. On our side, it would be that this is going to be considered by the city coming up, and that we've had meetings with Chris here. So, and also on their end, also asking about it. So, didn't really get much farther than that, but I would suspect if we had an ordinance in place like this, it would be utilized for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I was going to ask him the same thing, but I guess my other question would be for Randy. And administration-wise, do you see any issues or any concerns?
No, I don't. As Chris said, that 1% admin fee, I think will probably more than cover our initial cost of the program. There's also a $1,000 non-refundable application fee, and ongoing cost, unless they are missing payments and we have to file a lien or really minor, we have to file an annual report with the state saying what PACE projects we have outstanding. And I believe that should be about it, the way I understand this. And so I think we'll cover our administrative cost with the fees that we've got on this, and maybe even a little more. We have in the ordinance, Chris talked about the administration fee normally being capped at $40,000 or less. We put in our ordinance $25,000. That's something that could be changed if you desired. You could up that to 40,000, I would think. If you thought that you wanted to be sure we recovered all of our administrative costs, but when we were looking at this, we thought $25,000 would probably be adequate to cover our cost of administering this program. And then we get $500 every year. If we've got multiple PACE projects out there, we really don't have a whole lot of work other than just add another line on the report that goes to the state for each one of those projects. And we'll get, and the way these work, if I understand it correctly, is those administrative fees are paid to the primary lender, and then the primary lender pays them back to us with each of the semi-annual loan payments. So we don't even have work involved in billing and collecting those admin fees. They should come to us pretty much automatically. Not that I want more work to do, but I don't think this will be a lot of extra work. And I think the fees will cover the cost of that extra work.
If I could just add to that, made me think of, there's one other obligation that the city has. The state law requires that there be a marketing or education component to the program. And to date, what every city has done to fulfill that is post something to their website, a link to the program guidelines or link to the ordinance. And that has, everyone has felt to date that that's sufficient. Perhaps somebody will want to do something more, but.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Again, this is a public hearing, so anyone wishing to make comment can do so now. Okay, seeing and hearing no one. Ask for a planning commission report, please, Brianna. Oh, okay, sorry. With that, I'll close the hearing and move to item number 17. I would look for a motion to consider ordinance number 5665, creating a clean energy assessment district known as the City of Norfolk PACE District, which boundaries shall be the corporate boundaries of the City of Norfolk and its extraterritorial jurisdiction.
Your Honor, I'd offer for consideration ordinance number 5665.
Second that.
Okay, motion and second. I had a fairly extensive discussion during public hearing. Any further discussion, council, or questions? Looks like we covered it. Okay, short title, please, Brianna.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to create a clean energy assessment district, to establish definitions, to provide for the financing, administration, and collections, to promote energy efficiency improvements and renewable energy systems, and to provide the effective date hereof.
Okay, with that, roll call, please.
Grandquist,
Yay.
Langy,
Yay.
Merrill,
Yay.
Weeblehouse,
Yay.
Murin, Jackson, Clausen,
Yay.
File.
Yay.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5665 carries on first reading.
And I could make a comment at this point. I believe there's a developer in town that wants to close on a PACE loan fairly quickly, if my understanding is correct, Chris. And would like this passed on 3 readings tonight.
That being said, Your Honor, I would move that we suspend the rules and pass this ordinance on 56 on second and third reading.
Second.
Okay, motion and second to suspend the rules and approve on second and third readings. If no further discussion, roll call.
Grandquist,
Yay.
Langy,
Yay.
Merrill,
Yay.
Weeblehouse,
Yay.
Murin,
Yay.
Jackson,
Yay.
Clausen,
Yay.
File.
Yay.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5665 carries on second and third.
Okay, that takes us to our regular agenda, item number 18. I would entertain a motion to consider ordinance number 5662, vacating a portion of Cottonwood Street located in part of Park Addition in the city of Norfolk, Madison County, Nebraska. As a note, ordinance number 5662 passed on first reading at the May 18th, 2020 City Council meeting.
Your Honor, I'd move for consideration of ordinance number 5662.
Second that, Your Honor.
Okay, motion and second. And to refresh our memories on this, Steve Ramus, City Public Works Director.
Mayor and members of council, this is vacating a portion of Cottonwood Street that extends south of Norfolk Avenue. Primarily, it's in the right over the top of the Norfolk, or the North Fork of the Elkhorn River. The purpose of this is to kind of clear path to replat that area. We're working with landowners that on either side of that to replat that, and then the city would ultimately be taking ownership of the river itself within the high water marks. Hy-Vee would be on the west side, Hy-Vee gas station on the east side as well. But it's kind of part of the river restoration project, and just again, kind of cleaning up some right-of-way issues in there.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, short title, please.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to vacate a portion of Cottonwood Street located in part of Park Addition in the City of Norfolk, Madison County, Nebraska, and providing for the publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
Okay, roll call.
Granquist?
Yay.
Langy?
Yay.
Merrill?
Yay.
Weeblehouse?
Yay.
Murin? Jackson? Clausen? File?
Yay.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5662 carries on second reading.
Is there a reason we cannot suspend the rules and I would so move that we suspend the rules and pass this ordinance on second and third, or excuse me, on third reading, as there is no discussion.
Second?
Okay, motion and second to suspend the rules and approve on third reading. If no further discussion, roll call, please.
Granquist?
Yay.
Langy?
Yay.
Merrill?
Yay.
Weeblehouse?
Yay.
Murin? Jackson? Clausen? File?
Yay.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5662 carries on third reading.
Item 19, excuse me, would entertain a motion to consider ordinance number 5664, annexing a tract of land generally located north of Walter's East Knolls 12th edition. Ordinance number 5664 passed on first reading at the May 18th, 2020 City Council meeting.
Your Honor, I'd move consideration of ordinance 5664 on second reading.
Second.
Motion and second. Again, Steve Ramus, some background on this, please.
Mayor and council, the East Knolls development is continuing to grow. We have working with the developer now for East Knolls 13th edition, which is what this would be annexing in. Ultimately, it's about a 300-foot boundary on Benjamin Avenue, so we would be annexing in about a 300-foot stretch of Benjamin Avenue, sort of in the middle there between Victory Road and Highway 35. Again, I don't remember the exact lot count. I think there's 8 or 9 lots in this particular subdivision.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Any questions? Discussion?
8 lots.
Hearing none, short title.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to annex to said city a tract of land lying wholly in the northeast quarter of the northwest quarter of Section 24, and a tract of land lying wholly in the southeast quarter of the southwest quarter of Section 13, all in Township 24 North, Range 1 west of the 6th PM, Madison County, Nebraska, repealing all ordinances in conflict herewith, and to provide for the publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
Okay, roll call, please.
Granquist?
Yay.
Langy?
Yay.
Merrill?
Yay.
Weeblehouse?
Yay.
Murin? Jackson? Clausen? File?
Yay.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5664 carries on second reading.
Okay, item number 20, I would look for a motion to consider ordinance number 5666, amending section 2-5 of the code to include a transfer station per item fee for handling of items unacceptable for transfer to the Northeast Nebraska Solid Waste Coalition landfill, and to include an annual registration plate and/or decal fee for utility-type vehicles.
Your Honor, I move consideration of ordinance number 5666 on first reading.
Second.
Okay, motion and second, and for some background on this, we'll turn to Danny Myers-Noli, our city attorney, who is joining us via the telephone. Danny, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As far as ordinance number 5666, the transfer station has been receiving mainly in roll-offs and dump trucks an increasing number of items which are not acceptable to be shipped to the landfill. Those items need to be removed from the delivered loads by city staff. This ordinance includes a $10 charge for each unacceptable item that has to be removed from the delivered loads. On May 18th, 2020, the City Council passed ordinance number 5663, enacting Chapter 24, Article 11, allowing for the operation of UTVs on city streets. Section 24-356 requires registration of UTVs before they can lawfully be operated on the street. This ordinance includes a fee for the registration plate and or the decal. So this is essentially a clean-up ordinance because we've had a couple of items come up where a couple of separate ordinances where we needed to add things to the fee schedule, so this addresses both of those.
Okay, thank you, Danny. Any questions or comments from the council? Danny, just because I'm curious, do you know how many licenses we've issued for UTVs at this point?
The last that I had heard, which was probably about a week and a half ago, I think we were close to 10. There might be somebody present there that can, confirm that number, but that was the last that I had heard, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion or? 30, okay. 30, okay. Any other discussion, council? Okay, hearing none, short title, please.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to amend Section 2-5 of the official city code to include a transfer station per item fee for handling of items unacceptable for transfer to the Northeast Nebraska Solid Waste Coalition landfill, to include an annual registration plate and or decal fee for utility-type vehicles, to provide when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect, and to provide for the publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
Okay, roll call, please.
Granquist?
Yay.
Langy?
Yay.
Merrill?
Yay.
Weeblehouse?
Yay.
Murin? Jackson? Clausen?
Yay.
File?
Yay.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5666 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, I'd move that we suspend the rules and pass this ordinance on second and third reading so we can start collecting fees.
Okay, motion and second to suspend the rules and approve on second and third readings. If no further discussion, roll call.
Granquist?
Yay.
Langy?
Yay.
Merrill?
Yay.
Weeblehouse?
Yay.
Murin? Jackson? Clausen?
Yay.
File? All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5666 carries on second and third.
Okay, it takes us to item 21. I would entertain a motion to consider resolution number 2020-16 with the attached participant agreement form, setting forth requirements for individuals or organizations sponsoring adult and or youth team sports and other group recreational activities that desire to utilize city facilities for their programs.
Your Honor, I'd move for consideration of resolution number 2020-16.
Second?
Okay, motion and second. And again, Danny, can you give us some background on this, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Resolution number 2020-16 addresses the city allowing the use of city facilities for adult and or youth team sports and other group recreational activities in accordance with Governor Ricketts' June 1st statewide sports reopening guidelines. This resolution includes the following requirements related to individuals or organizations who choose to utilize city facilities. Number one, the individual or organization must enter into an agreement or addendum, if appropriate, for the use of the facilities that addresses COVID-19 issues. Number two, all players, coaches, officials, and other participants must sign a participants agreement that acknowledges and assumes risk, releases and indemnifies the city, includes a covenant not to sue, and agrees to comply with all laws, regulations, directed health measures and guidelines, and all security policies or procedures established by the city. Number 3, the applicable provisions of the June 1st statewide sports reopening guidelines or any updates or modifications thereto must be posted on all practice and playing fields, courts, grounds, and other facilities where both adults and youth practice or have games or other group recreational activities. Number 4, this allows the city to deny entrance to its facilities to any non-compliant participant or require a non-compliant participant to leave the premises at any time. I'm happy to answer any questions you have as to item number 21.
Okay, thank you, Danny. Any questions?
What exactly is non-compliant? What do you got to do?
Were you able to hear that, Danny?
I heard the word non-compliant, but that was about it. I'm sorry.
What exactly does non-compliant mean? What are you stating there?
Right, that's a good question. So when we're talking non-compliance, I think we're talking people that would refuse to obtain the waivers from players or organizers or coaches or whoever enters into those agreements if they would refuse to sign the addendum. So in our case, all of the teams that we're looking at right now, I believe for the most part, we already have agreements. So in order to utilize our field for summer practice and games, they would need to agree to sign the addendum. So if they would refuse to do that and the accompanying waivers, then that would be non-compliant.
So is all the other cities doing this also?
Yes, sir. They're all doing that. So essentially, this came about within the last week and a half. So we've been kind of trying to hurriedly get everything done. The league put this together in consultation with some of their outside attorneys. So a waiver that is good for participants here in Norfolk should also work in another city. So every time we have players here or we send players to other cities, as long as they're using the same documents that we're using, which I believe most are, they should be covered in every city.
Danny, how do we verify that? How do we know that a visiting team has signed waivers on their end, or anybody that's visiting the park?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I guess we're trying to, this is kind of a fast-moving situation here. I think as far as tournaments and games, I think we're going to try to look at who's coming here and just verify that they've signed those in their cities. But as of right now, I think we're just kind of hoping that all the cities that are, participating with our players here, that they're also engaging in the same, that they're using the same documents that we're using, which are the League of Municipalities, those sponsored documents.
One more question. Would you think that, say in Omaha or Papillion, La Vista, teams like that would have the same exact waiver also as who might be in part of this League of Municipalities? If that makes sense, I'll just speak on our behalf personally. We have Columbus coming to town to play our team here in Norfolk. And I do know that they're signing waivers also for their own organization. But I have Bellevue coming to town, and I'm curious if they would have the exact same type of waivers or if I'd have to do something with them.
So I'm having a hard time hearing you, Councilman. I believe that your concern, based on what I did hear, is that we have different cities coming here and trying to verify that we're all going to have the same waiver. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically, yeah, you're correct, Danny.
I think, so to be honest, I don't think that is something that we have talked about exactly internally yet. I think this has happened so very quickly. Like I said, it's been within the last week and a half. We've just been trying to do our best to make sure that our teams here in town are able to use our fields, and we're trying to do the best on that end. I think that's a really good point. And while it is my understanding that all of the other, I've been on conference calls where I've heard from dozens of other cities who make it sound like they're using these same documents. I think that's something we need to talk about as staff and do our best to make sure that the teams that are coming here are also signing waivers. So I truly don't have a perfect answer for that, but it's something that I know we've talked about as staff and something we need to look at further to be sure.
And Danny, is it accurate to say that these discussions in anticipation of these activities being permitted again have been happening within cities, within the league for weeks now, and there's been a desire to take as much of a uniform approach to this as possible among the cities?
Yes, absolutely. So we've been on weekly calls. I'm on weekly calls, and other staff are, as far as looking at the city's parks and looking at pools, looking at all of the property owned by the city that the public generally likes to use. So we've been on the same page for the last several weeks. It's just that we've kind of been at the mercy of the governor's directed health measures. So when this came about, this was finalized about a week ago. So we've been kind of trying to scramble. But it is really my understanding that all of the cities that we participate with, our teams participate with, it is my understanding that they're going to have the same kind of waivers as we have here. That's my understanding as of right now.
Danny, is it safe to say that the waivers and the addendums, the true spirit of it is to make sure that everybody is in compliance with the DHMs and continues to do that and protects the city? Would that be correct?
Yes, sir. That's absolutely it. I mean, we're just trying to make sure that if we're opening our fields, if we're opening city fields, that we're doing our best. We're making our best efforts to transfer the risk that comes with using our fields. So we have waivers, we have the addendums. We're also posting signs, and as well as this resolution. These are all just things that we're doing our best to make it clear that making the decision to utilize these fields does come with some level of risk, and so that's kind of what we're trying to mitigate. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I know, as has been alluded to, there's been a lot of discussion and work that's gone into this, and I think it's a reasonable action to allow for the safe use of our city facilities under this new environment that we're all living in, while still offering the city a level of protection. And so I appreciate the staff work that's gone into it. If there's no further discussion or comments, I would ask for roll.
Granquist?
Yeah.
Langy?
Yay.
Merrill?
Yay.
Weeblehouse?
Yay.
Murin? Jackson?
Yay.
Clausen?
Yay.
File?
Yay.
All council members voting in the affirmative. Resolution 2020-16 is adopted.
Okay, item 22 would look for a motion to consider the addendum agreement form to be completed and attached to agreements with individuals or organizations sponsoring adult and or youth team sports and other group recreational activities that desire to utilize city facilities for their programs.
I'll make the motion, Your Honor. Second.
Okay, motion and second. Danny, anything further to add to this part of it?
Just that this is a blank document, Mayor and Council. I kind of alluded to this in the last agenda item, but this is a blank addendum. This is going to go with all of our existing agreements for the use of city fields, and we're just asking for approval of this document. As we don't have we haven't had a lot of time to put together the individual ones, but we just wanted approval of the content of this.
Okay, makes sense. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Granquist?
Yay.
Langy?
Yay.
Merrill?
Yay.
Weeblehouse?
Yay.
Murin?
Yay.
Jackson?
Yay.
Clausen?
Yay.
File?
Yay.
All council members voting in the affirmative. Motion carries.
And that concludes this meeting of the Norfolk City Council. We are adjourned.